Hey, what is up YouTube? Welcome to today's video, and today we are going to be going over the top 5 3.21 League starters. And a lot of these builds are the same exact ones as 3.20, but they are the same for the same reason, in that they are very strong, very proven, and going to get you through the start of the league to have the best league start ever. Now, this time around, the league mechanic is a little bit different. We're not doing some cringe Sanctum thing where we're trying to avoid all the damage possible. In Crucible League, we're going to be fighting a plethora of mobs, overwhelming our character in somewhat of a circular arena. So any sort of lingering damage on the ground is going to be very, very strong. Any build that does well with a lot of mobs at once is going to do very, very well. Now, in order to see what the league starters are and how they differ from last time, it is a good thing to look at what the most popular league starters were in Sanctum. Now, Sanctum happened last league on day 2, so you can see the time machine, the snapshot of what the league starters were like on day 2. And you can see number 1 by far is Seismic Trap at 12%, then Explosive Arrow Totems at 8%, Venom Gyre at 7%, Poisonous Concoction at 6%, and then Cold Dot, which is Vortex at 5%, and Spark at 5%. Now, there is this little bit of a small meta shakeup. I think one of the biggest things that GGG did decide to nerf was Chaos and Poison builds through the Masteries. And they also kind of destroyed Seismic Trap because they nerfed a lot of the damage on Saboteur. They tried to change Saboteur from a trap and mine ascendancy into more of an overall ascendancy. A lot of people are theorizing that you can play Cast on Crit with Saboteur a lot earlier now. However, that is not really going to be a league starter. Now, next up, Poisonous Concoction also got completely gutted with the changes. Right now, for Poisonous Concoction, you only use 2 Life Flash charges. However, in the new patch, you can be using up to 9 or 10 Life Flash charges, making it very, very hard to sustain. Now, the meta is going to be greatly affected by GGG's decision on stance swapping. Right now, there is a tech that's going to exist in 3.21 where you can swap between Blood and Sand, giving you permanent Adrenaline and Onslaught for very, very little investment. Now, bow league starters are super, super hyped. If you look through YouTube or you see people on Reddit, a lot of people are hyped about bow, purely because casters got nerfed for leveling, and and bows also got +2 projectiles on the passive tree, allowing them to maybe play Tornado Shot or some sort of Barrage Lightning Arrow a little bit earlier. And in addition, GGG has also announced Vol Lightning Arrow and Vol Ice Shot, which seeks to address the main problems of those skills, which is its single target. Now, first off, we have a very, very bland skill, or not really bland skill, but this is a very interesting archetype known as Cold Dot. Now, Cold Dot can be played on a variety of ascendancies. You can play it on Occultist, you can play it on Elementalist, you can play it on Trickster, or you can play it on Hierophant. If you are playing softcore trade, I think most people should play Elementalist. Elementalist has the most damage. It also has a little bit of AoE, and you don't really need the hardcore defenses of Trickster. Now, Trickster is probably the go-to ascendancy for hardcore, purely because it has great recovery while mapping, and it is almost immortal while mapping. Now, this build has decent mapping speed. I wouldn't call it exactly the fastest mapper in the world. As you can see in this mapping demonstration video, is decently fast, and you do have good coverage, and you have chill everywhere on the ground. So you leave these circles on the ground, and then you just run around and everything dies that's in the circle. Now, this is going to be super, super strong for the league mechanic, because the league mechanic is going to spawn a lot of mobs in a circle. And if there's more mobs that spawn in, they're all going to get affected by the ground degen or cold degen on the ground. And the defensive aspect of chill is going to make it super, super safe. Now, you are going to be able to scale this build to do Ubers in the end game, and you can probably get around like 20, 30, 40 mil combined dot DPS. Now, the main thing about this build is that a lot of people think that Cold Dot is a very brain-dead build that requires no buttons and you just run around with Vortex on left click. However, that is not really true. Vortex is a very, very button-intensive build, and it does require you to put your Vortex on left click, but you're still casting Cold Snap on cooldown. You're casting Creeping Frost, and all of these abilities put a ground degen or a separate cold dot on the ground. And then you also have to press Frost Bomb to apply cold exposure, or you can either use Arcanist Brand or something like that. And then you also have to use your movement skill, and then you also have to use Flame Dash or Frost Blink. So overall, there's a lot of buttons for this build. So even though Cold Dot may seem like the perfect beginner build, its playstyle is not exactly the most beginner friendly. However, this build's main trademark is that it is actually one of the best Ruthless builds. And if it is one of the best Ruthless builds, then that also means that this build requires nearly 0 gear at all to function and do all of the Void Stones. And this build's main primary way of scaling, like all spells, is to get skill gem levels. So you want as much plus spell skill gems, as much plus cold skill gems as possible. And overall, the damage is more than enough to get up to the point where you can do Ubers comfortably. And having that extra chill effect of 30 or 40% does make the boss really, really slow. And it makes it a lot easier to do a lot of the boss fights. So overall, this build, I would say, is a great all-rounder build. It really excels at everything. And the only main thing about this build is if you want like instant damage, it's not going to give you that gratification where stuff is just going to instantly die like you would have from a crit hit based build. Now, next up, we have Boneshatter. Now, Boneshatter is a tried and true build. It is probably the quintessential definition of a melee build in Path of Exile. It is a default attack, but inside of that default attack, you have some great built-in AoE clear depending on how many mobs you hit. So basically, you hit a mob and then like some stuff explodes around you, and you do all of this AoE damage. And Boneshatter also has some great inherent damage scaling because you build up these stacks that are called trauma stacks that you see here. So the more times you attack, the more like physical damage you do. But at the same time, you're also doing damage to yourself. So this is why we play this on a Juggernaut or Slayer. Now, Slayer is going to be a little bit better for early game mapping. It's going to have that strike range. You're going to have that AoE scaling a lot better. However, Juggernaut is just the best option in the long run. It allows you to get tanky enough to the point where you don't really need to worry about dodging any attacks. So you can just stand there and melee away. Now, the main thing about this build is it is a mapping build. Primarily, you don't really want to be doing like uber bosses or farming a lot of bosses with it. And the reason behind that is that the build scaling, it's really hard to get around 10 mil DPS on Boneshatter. And most of the times you're playing the more hardcore variant or a tanky Juggernaut variant, you're probably going to be around like 4 mil to 5 mil DPS. And there's not really much room for scaling because you're not really playing a dot build that scales with like dot multiplier. And you're also playing a crit build which scales with crit and crit multi. So you are more or less just stuck at just getting a very high two-hand fizz damage and then scaling some impale chance and impale effect. Now, for all melee builds, you will notice that there is a worrying trend where you have to place down your totems, and your totems are responsible for almost effectively more than doubling your damage or more in some cases. And this requires you to put down your totems every like 4 seconds while bossing. And it's very, very annoying, especially when the totem dies. Now, this build is capable of doing the Ubers purely because it is very, very tanky. And it can actually do it pretty easily. It's just not going to be the fastest Uber killer in the world. You can just stand there and AFK attack the boss. I think there's even some videos of Ben doing Awakener on a 1 link on Boneshatter Juggernaut, purely because the skill has good inherent scaling with very little gear requirements. And also because it's so tanky that you can just stand there and attack. And uptime is key when you try to calculate how much damage you're actually doing. Now, this build is actually going to be vastly buffed in 3.20 since we're going to have access to permanent Adrenaline and Onslaught. And before, this build did not have access to that. And Adrenaline gives you 100% increased damage, 25% movement speed, and 25% attack speed. Now, this build I would not play if you want to focus on doing bosses as fast as possible, or you want a build that you can min-max to endgame to the point where you are one-shotting the bosses. This is just not going to be the build for that. This is a build that's great for Atlas progression and just great for someone who wants to make currency through mapping. Now, next up, we have a build called Toxic Rain Ballistas, and this is a brainchild, I think, of Palsteron, or Palsteron was doing some theory crafting regarding it, but he is going to release a variant of this with Toxic Rain Ballista on Pathfinder. Now in this video is Champion, but Champion or Pathfinder is perfectly fine. Pathfinder did get majorly buffed in the recent patch, so you get 50% increased effect of Withered. And then you can also get stack application, so you can get 15 stacks really fast, and that pretty much gives you double damage on your chaos damage. Now, Toxic Rain Ballistas can also even be played without the Ballista Totem. There's people who just self-cast Toxic Rain. However, in softcore trade, a lot of people are going to play the pure Ballista version because of this helmet called Wilma's Requito, or whatever it's called. Now, what this helmet does is it allows you to scale your attack speed to also affect your cast speed to also affect your attack speed. It grants you Ancestral Bond, which I think gives you an extra totem, but you can't do damage yourself. Now, the nice part about this is you can scale sources of Onslaught. So the Onslaught gives you attack and cast speed, so you're pretty much getting 20% attack speed for free. Adrenaline also gives you 25% attack and cast speed, and that also gives you 25% attack speed for free. And a Silver Flask also gives you some attack and cast speed. So there's a lot of different aspects of scaling in this build that allows you to get a lot of attack speed. And the way you scale Toxic Rain damage is by damage over time multiplier, chaos damage over time multiplier, attack speed, and your gem level. So it's a very similar way of scaling it compared to spells, except attack speed also benefits it. Now, this item, the Wilmas, we're not really sure how expensive it's going to be. I think there are quite a few builds revolving around Ballistas that will want to use this item, because this item just allows you to get so much damage so early on, allowing you to do Ubers with very, very low investment in terms of currency spent. Now, Pathfinder is what some people are trying to make purely because it's new, it's the new thing, and also because you can solve a lot of the recovery issues with Toxic Rain. Because you're using Ballista Totems, there's no way you're really leeching life back yourself. But there's this new node called Master Surgeon, which makes it so your life flask doesn't expire when you reach full life. So what that means is that you can pretty much have a life flask that's running 24/7, giving you up to like 2 to 3 to 4k life per second. Now, the main thing about Toxic Rain that I really disliked when I played the build, and a lot of people also expressed that they dislike about the build, is that it is very, very hard to increase your clear speed by that much. And the delayed dot damage is not for everyone, and not everyone enjoys having that little bit of delay before the damage comes out. And since this is a totem build with dot damage, it's going to be a little bit of a double delay. Now, this build also struggles a little bit against bosses that move around, but I think having it on the Ballista Totems, that does help it out a lot. And it's not really the best build to min-max because, again, since you're not really able to scale crit or crit multi, you do limit your damage output or max ceiling to somewhere that's around 30 to 40 million. But it's definitely enough to do all the content in the game very, very easily. Now, next up, we have Venom Gyre. And Venom Gyre is a league starter that I kind of lump together with bows, because they are more or less the same tree, and the main difference is that instead of taking the bow nodes, you take the claw nodes. But it is very similar to a bow league starter. So Venom Gyre is an elemental damage hit-based build, which scales your crit and your attack speed. Now, Venom Gyre, I think, is probably the fastest mapper out of all of the builds that I listed in the top 5, and it also has the most endgame damage potential, where you can trivialize the Ubers with enough gear once you get enough gear on Venom Gyre. And since it's an attack-based crit build, and also with any bow build, you'll reach the point where you're going to nearly be able to one-shot the boss. Now, like I said, this build is able to be swapped into bows really easily, and a lot of people's dream when they play PoE is to become Robin Hood. They want to become a sort of bow character that can one-shot the whole screen with one shot of the arrow, one shot of the bow. And this build does allow you to swap into Tornado Shot with very, very few swaps, and even using many of the similar items. And all you have to do is change your claw nodes over to some bow nodes, and it's really not that big of a swap. Now, this build is great to min-max. There's a lot of different upgrades to get, and the best part about these upgrades is that every single one of these upgrades, you'll see your damage going up by a lot. And it's very different from playing like a spell cast build that only scales with spell skill gems, because after a while, you can't really find those upgrades. Now, This build does have a playstyle thing that a lot of people dislike, which is the fact that you have to use whirling blades. So if you can see the way that the skill works is that you throw out these blades, and then you catch the blades, and then you can shoot out the caught blades with whirling blades. So there is a 2-button component. It's one of Path of Exile's only 2-button skills, where one skill has a conditional upon another skill in order for it to function fully. Now this build, like all of the other builds, has a potential massive buff with the fact that you can get adrenaline for free or for very, very little requirement on the tree. Now, difference between this build is not exactly the tankiest build. Its HP pool is not the highest. It doesn't have insane amounts of like crazy mitigation. However, it is tanky enough to get to 100 while mapping without really dying, as long as you watch what map mods you roll. And the biggest benefit for this build is its life recovery rate with the claws, because you throw out a lot of attacks, and every single time you hit an enemy with one of these blades, you can gain up to like 40 to 50 life per hit, and that does allow you to get an insane amount of recovery to the point where you can nearly leech back your full HP pool in one attack. Now, lastly, we have one of the most boring builds, or not, one of the most solid builds for beginners, because it has one of the most lazy playstyles around, where you just walk around the map, you throw a fire trap down, and everything dies. And as you can see right here, this is literally a walking simulator build. And not only are you a walking simulator build, you're also an unkillable walking simulator, because you're playing Juggernaut, you have so much defenses, you have so much recovery, and you honestly just cannot die. Now, this build can be played on Juggernaut, it can be played on Inquisitor, or it can be played on Elementalist late game once you get the Forbidden Jewels. Now, this build scales with gem level and damage over time multiplier. So you'll see a lot of these recommendations are all about scaling gem levels and all about scaling dot multi, because skills that scale off gem level are very, very good for league starting. It is not that gear intensive of a requirement. Now, this build is great for beginners because of the fact that you literally cannot die on the build. And it's also not too much button pressing, and there's no real rotation or anything, and you just walk around, stuff dies around you. If they're not dying, you throw down a fire trap and they will be dead sooner or later. Now, this build is great for mapping. It's gonna be great for the Crucible League mechanic, because all the mobs that spawn around you are just gonna slowly burn to death. Now, the biggest problem with this build that everyone complains about is the fact that this build has atrocious boss damage until you get an 8-link helmet for your Righteous Fire, and then you put the fire trap in the 6-link, or you can do it the other way around. Now, Ubers should not be your goal for this build, because it's going to struggle to kill Ubers, in a sense that you're going to be spending like 10 plus minutes on the boss fight, and it's not really the best for late game scaling if you're looking to insta-kill bosses. It is a dot build. You will slowly burn the enemy to death, but I highly recommend it if you want a really, really simple build to play that's unkillable, and that will allow you to just focus on what's going on in the game instead of trying to figure out if your character is on the brink of death or something. So overall, I would highly recommend it. Very, very solid build. Now, overall, if you look at these top 5 builds, every single one of these builds have a very, very different playstyle to it, and playstyle is definitely king. You will not have fun playing the strongest build if you hate the playstyle. I know for me personally, I hate Righteous Fire, I hate Cold Dot. I've tried them both, and that's purely because I don't like the playstyle of it. I like the playstyle of Venom Gyre. I like the playstyle of attack-based builds. I like the playstyle of being able to attack very fast. So everyone is a little bit different. Some people are lazier. Some people like a more active playstyle. And next up, you should choose a league starter based on your goals and what content you plan to play. If you want to do boss carries, then you should probably not be playing Righteous Fire, because you're going to put the boss to sleep and your carry is going to fall asleep while waiting for you to finish the boss carry. And the same thing as Venom Gyre. Venom Gyre is not exactly the best build ever for trying to do Uber bosses, as it does require you to get a baseline amount of gear first. Now, it also matters about how long you plan to play the league starter. Do you plan to swap off of the league starter after a couple days, since you're going to farm currency for another build? Or do you hate leveling so much that you just want to make this your one and only character? If you want to make this your one and only character, you should probably try to choose a league starter that has better late game scaling potential, like a Bow league starter or Venom Gyre. Now, the Crucible league mechanic is something that's really important to think about, because the league mechanic matters a lot for your league starter. I know in Sanctum, a lot of people just could not play melee, and they could not play Righteous Fire because it was so bad for the League mechanic. And for this League mechanic, any build that has lingering ground damage or ignite proliferation or any damage that will last over time that will kill the mobs as soon as it spawns is going to be huge. And the biggest thing for 3.21, I think, is the fact that this permanent adrenaline tech exists, and I do think a lot of builds will be way more powerful as a League starter with this tech still in the game, mainly any sort of attack-based build that has easy access to nodes on the bottom of the skill tree. But thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you find more Mirrors, Divines, and Mage Bloods than me. Let me know down in the comments below what League starter you're planning to start and which one of these builds is your personal favorite. But thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye!